Good afternoon, South Bend Community Secondary. My name is Chase Leisman, and I'm here with Miss Stephanie Stewart-Bridges, and she is going to be presenting this afternoon on ACES. So if you have any questions during her presentation, please feel free to comment, and we will make sure that your comments are addressed. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Stephanie Stewart-Bridges. I'm the Director of African American Student and Parent Services, and I'll be sharing with you the presentation on adverse childhood experiences. Just give me a moment to share my screen. All right. So just a little bit about how ACES was brought to our community. In 2015, Beacon Community Health did their typical community health needs assessment and found that one of the priority needs for our community was addressing individuals who had experienced trauma. So what they did in May of 2016, they trained 25 individuals to be master trainers in ACE interface. And so ACES was a study conducted in the 1990s by Dr. Robert Anda and Dr. Vincent Folletti. It was a partnership between the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, which is a health insurance company. And so this study was particularly spectacular in that it had 17,000 study participants, which is unusual. It was a really large study. And the basis of the study was to determine how adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, had an impact on physical and mental health problems later in life. It was actually the direct evidence that is, in fact, a truth. Dr. Folletti and Dr. Anda both had individual reasons for wanting to do this study, really to kind of provide some clarity around how risk behaviors kind of transition into these health concerns, so that if an individual who has a problem with smoking doesn't stop smoking simply from the fact that smoking leads to heart disease and all these other lung ailments, they wanted to understand what was the behavior, what was the science behind why those choices were continuing to be made. And so the other unique quality of this particular study was that it looked at several different types of adversity, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. So our time today is going to be spent talking a little bit about the neuroscience around ACEs, how ACEs has an impact on the brain. Then we're going to speak a little bit about the data that was collected during the study. And then finally, we're going to talk about this concept called resilience. Please keep in mind that the ACES presentation is used to be a cliffhanger. There are no definite answers as how to resolve the issues or concerns around individuals who've experienced trauma. It's really an opportunity for us to develop a common language around the impact of trauma and to work in our specific communities on addressing those needs. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about the neuroscience. So just to be transparent, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I know just enough to be dangerous. Dr. Nancy Michael from the University of Notre Dame has done a wonderful job in helping us to understand the neuroscience around ACEs, and Dr. Anda, when we went through our training, explained it really, really well. And so our central nervous system is the way our body responds to the world around us. The brain's primary function is for us to protect ourselves. And so we experience these different things within our world through our synaptic connections. We are born with every single synaptic connection that we need, or neuron that we need within our bodies. And so it's important to understand that our body does not, or we don't experience an external stimuli. Like, we don't touch the stove and then 5 minutes later we say ouch and pull our hand away. We do that almost instantaneously, and we do that through our experiences or our synaptic connections. We have to remember that our synaptic connections are very experience driven. So when we look at it from the time of birth, our synaptic connections are very sparse because the way we experience the world is based on how other people experience the world for us. So we essentially eat, we sleep, we cry, we have our needs met. But then as we get older and those elementary ages, we begin this process called branching. So the more we experience, the more connections we develop. And then we hit puberty, and those connections begin this process called pruning. So we prune away those experiences that we don't use or we don't necessarily need. We can also think of it from the perspective of when a child is learning how to walk, their first instinct is to crawl over to something, pull themselves up, and then start walking. We don't necessarily need the connections related to that type of walking when we're 12 and 14 years old. So consequently, what happens is those connections related to those initial forms of learning how to walk get pruned away. And then we keep those connections that are more central to our survival or that we experience the most. We also remember that children who experience trauma, their way of adapting to the world looks incredibly different than a child who grows up with safety. So those individuals who experience trauma as children, they adapt to the world through fight, flight, or freeze. They can, in their adult functioning, they survive in the worst conditions. When you look at a child who has grown up in a safe or what you would consider a safe environment, they adapt to the world around them through people, process, and possibility. And they will survive in the best conditions, but they're most vulnerable in conditions that may cause a lot of stress. And so when you think about this, how children kind of approach new ideas and new ways of doing things, there's a level of safety that coincides with the ability to do that. When I think about my own children and how my husband used to throw her up in the air and catch her, throw her up in the air and catch her. And then what happens for them is she developed a sense of safety. She felt as if that whenever somebody would throw her up in the air, they would catch her. So she would go to different parts of the house and flip off of things. And so she felt incredibly safe. So there are times where we have to look at this concept of safety when we're introducing new thoughts and ideas and creating an opportunity of change for children. So the most important thing with the ACES study is to realize that everybody's situation is a situation that something positive can come out of. So it's important to realize that the experiences associated with your ACEs is not the end of your story, that you have the capacity to build the resilience necessary to be very successful in life. And so what kind of situation that might be good for a person who've experienced ACEs are those safety issues or, being a fireman or those different types of things. So everybody's experience is incredibly important. So where do we first notice where adaptation and expectation collide? We typically notice that in the classroom. So the expectation for a child to sit down, be quiet and focused and do their work. A lot of times children who've experienced a lot of trauma, they don't have the capacity to do that. And their adaptation to change looks incredibly different from what you might experience. A child who comes home every night to a parent and not aware of what type of mood they're going to be in. So that chronic inconsistency and not understanding whether or not their needs will be met creates this opportunity for their adaptation to change to look incredibly different. So when you look at that from the lens of your classroom experiences, how might we create an opportunity for those students to learn those adaptive skills and to have a better opportunity for building the resilience necessary to be successful in the classroom? So as we look at this concept of ACEs, we also consider the sensitive periods that happen during a child's development. When we think about children who've experienced abuse, um, some of the ways they develop their language skills or some of their motor skills can also be impacted. So we look at it from the lens that we have to kind of think about those things in that way. The other thing to consider is the perfect time to create an opportunity for them to develop these adaptive skills that are not just necessarily not just necessary during childhood, but also necessary throughout life. So when we look at this concept of these traumatic experiences, we also have to consider the impact of stress. What role does stress play in the lives of individuals who have experienced these traumas? And so what has a tendency of happening is that these children are exposed to what's considered toxic stress, which is consistent and persistent stress over a series or a period of time. Research shows that our bodies are really only supposed to withstand 20 minutes of stress at a time, enough time for us to be able to fight, flight, or flee our situation to be able to be safe again. So when we look at a child who has constantly in this position of having to have the cortisol that's related to your stress response constantly emitted, it can also impair their ability to feel the calm after resolving an issue. Um, the one thing that your body doesn't recognize is that stress response looks the same whether or not you are being chased by a bear or you have just lost your keys. Your body doesn't differentiate between the two, and so that stress response is still the same. Here's a quick video that will give you some good information on the impact of toxic stress on a developing child.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious, lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
All right. So I know that we can't see each other, but I am happy to hear some of your first thoughts related to that video. There were lots of things incorporated in the video that were awesome for me to understand. Just the impact on that ability and of the developing brain. But I also like to hear some things from you if you all would like to chime in. Are there any responses?
Not yet. You know, as the video was talking about, you know, one thing I kind of think of as being a teacher, you know, just really making sure that we have a classroom where that is safe for students is definitely a key.
Thank you. All right.
So we have one question.
Okay.
Is the toxic stress response reversible?
I believe it is. I think that's one of the things to consider is that concept of building resilience. I think that we have the capacity to be able to redirect some of those synaptic connections. And so that's what that whole idea around resilience is for.
And then another comment from Cameron, it's like being compassionate when a child is distressed is a good idea to help them cope with the stress.
Exactly. And so there's a lot of different videos that the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard has around how facial expressions have an impact on the distress of a child. How a lack of responsiveness also has an impact on a child. So really just that opportunity for compassion is really critically important.
Okay, I like Christy's idea of if each teacher.
And we have one more question that came in. Are there remediation strategies that can be implemented in class?
So yes, there are lots of different things. This whole concept of social-emotional learning and being trauma-informed that we're working on. There's lots of different things that your social worker can work with you. And I'm also happy to take time to have conversations around that as well.
Make it reoccurring, you're done, right? Like,
all right.
Right. So I think we're ready to move on.
All right. So lots of great comments. I appreciate that. The thing that we always want to remember is that we all have a collective choice. This concept and this idea around adverse childhood experiences and building resilience is important. But we all play a part in the picture, and we'll all have an opportunity to get to that point at the end of this presentation to talk more about that. So now we're going to speak a little bit about the ACES study, how the study was conducted, who the individuals who participated, what that looked like. So again, the ACES study was the largest study done of its kind. There were 17,000 participants. Those participants were mostly middle-class white individuals who had health insurance. None of them had I think it was less than 4% of them had less than a high school diploma. So not only were they middle class with health insurance, they also had at least a good level of education. So the study also didn't just look at one adversity, it looked at three different things. Excuse me. It looked at household dysfunction, neglect, and abuse. And so each of these areas is considered a dose or one ACE. So the questions in household dysfunction kind of centered around substance abuse. Was there anyone in your family that used drugs? Are your parents married, separated, or are they divorced? Has anyone in your family experienced mental illness? Did you witness your mother being hit, bit, kicked? So domestic abuse. Did anyone in your family go to jail for any reason? So those were the ACE or the statements that were related to household dysfunction. They also asked questions around neglect, both emotional and physical. They asked questions around emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. So if you answered yes to any of the statements related to those sections, that was considered one ACE. They didn't ask how many times that particular situation occurred. Just having experienced it one time gave you one ACE. And so you had the capacity to have up to 10 ACEs if you answered yes to any of those experiences. From those 17,000 individuals, 33% of them mentioned that they had not had any adverse childhood experiences. But 67% of the individuals who completed the study had experienced at least one ACE. So 26% of the study participants had experienced at least one ACE, 16% experienced two, 10% experienced three ACEs, and 16% experienced four or more ACEs. The other thing they noticed from the study is that ACEs were highly interrelated. That if you had one type of an ACE, there was an 87% chance that you would have a second ACE. The ACEs also had a dose-response relationship. So if you look at this graph, you'll notice that individuals who had greater than 5 ACEs, so if they answered 5 or more of those questions on the survey, they had a 55% chance of developing a health issue. They also noticed that there was a correlation between adverse childhood experiences and lung disease. When you think about smoking, smoking is supposed to alleviate stress. And so those individuals who had an early initiation of smoking continued to smoke throughout their lifetime and consequently developed some type of lung disease. It wasn't the adverse childhood experience that caused the lung disease. It was the risk behavior associated with alleviating the stress that continued throughout their lifespan and allowed them to develop the health issue. There's a high correlation between a high ACE score, anxiety, depression, and a difficulty of concentrating. The other thing that was noticed with ACEs is that they were intergenerational. So this graph is a pictorial of individuals who grew up in an alcoholic environment had a higher tendency of marrying an individual who was an alcoholic. And that's sometimes related to normalizing behaviors. When you think about normalized behaviors, we kind of think of them in terms of some of the positive things that happen in our family. So when you experience a holiday, such as Thanksgiving, every year you cook a turkey, you invite family over, you have dinner together, and you do a family-related activity afterwards, whether it's watch football or a movie, whatever it is. Nobody writes down or teaches you that specific family behavior. It's based on your community of practice. It's just what happens. It's the normalized things that you do. But those normalized behavior also come in very negative forms. How you relate and enable individuals in your household who may have had a problem with alcoholism, and how you treat that situation and you make it normal. So normalized behaviors kind of create this dynamic where ACEs are intergenerational. As I mentioned earlier, there's a higher correlation between ACEs and depression. Individuals who have 4 or more ACEs have a 60% chance of developing depression. This is just a list of all of the different types of ACEs that are physical health problems that are related to ACEs. So you have obesity, smoking, violence, fetal death, alcoholism, and alcohol abuse. These are all of the different physical health or ACE attributable problems. What we noticed from the ACEs study, it comes down to 3 different things. ACEs are common, they are interrelated, and they are powerful. I Thank you. Individuals, our community, 67% of the study also showed that there were 67% of the individuals who participated in the study who had experienced at least one ACE. If we look at the population of individuals who were included in that 17,000 and apply them to the communities that we serve, we know that those numbers would be much greater. We know that an increased risk of multiple health and social problems are associated with ACEs. We know that if you have one ACE, there's an 87% chance that you're going to have another ACE. We also know that they're intergenerational based on how we normalize behaviors. This is our, it's called the oil slick slide. And what it does is it gives us a picture of population attributable risk. This slide just shows us that if we address the ACEs, we can have a 65% impact on individuals who experience alcoholism. We can have a 41% impact on individuals who experience chronic depression. And if you just go around the wheel, you can see how much of an impact we have if we address the ACEs that individuals have experienced. It doesn't mean that we remove the adverse childhood experience. We just create an opportunity and an environment where resilience can be developed. So it's up to all of us. We have the power to reverse the impact of the ACE score. This is just a short video on how the impact of resilience can create change.
Why do some people do well despite serious hardships? The science of resilience can help us find answers.
We define resilience as a good outcome in the face of adversity. The extent to which we can build capacities in all children early in their lives to be able to deal with whatever bumps in the road or major obstacles may be coming down the track. That's an investment in building strong human capital and healthy, productive adults.
Some children face more obstacles and adversity than others.
Like having a parent with a major mental illness, growing up in a very socioeconomically disadvantaged community, going to schools that are not good, being exposed to violence in the neighborhood or in the home.
But some children do well despite these significant obstacles.
Resilience is that ability or set of capacities for positive adaptation, allowing you to keep in balance.
We're talking about the kinds of capacities and skills and abilities that give people a sense of mastery and management of difficulty.
It's tempting to think about children as either having this resilient quality or not. But resilience is built over time, just as and in parallel with how the architecture of the brain is built over time.
It's not just in the person. It's in the interaction between the person and the environment.
So we care about resilience for the same reason that we care about promoting healthy development, because in many respects it is the same. We are interested in promoting resilience in children so that despite the odds, more and more children can grow up to be productive citizens.
So that is the concept of resilience. And I was just looking at the chat box. There are so many great comments in there related to stress and how, many perceive stress. There's a comment about stress being in the eye of the beholder. And so one person's stress may look different from another person's stress. And I think that's why it's important to consider that concept of it's not what did you do, but what happened to you. So sometimes a person's response to stress is always going to look different based on their perception of it and their experience with it. So that's a great comment. Also, speaking about modeling the ability to cope. You know, I know we understand that our children come from lots of different environments. So it's important for us to continue modeling those changes. Excuse me, just one second.
So if you have any additional comments or questions, now would be the time you can go ahead and drop those, in the chat. I think, as she was saying, there's definitely a lot of good points that are brought up with stress. I mean, what we perceive as stressful, might not be stressful to somebody else, and vice versa. So just having that mindset of, there's a lot of different lenses that we can see through. I think that would definitely help our understanding with our students.
Great. Thank you. I don't know, it's allergy season. It's a lot going on here, so I apologize. I'm trying to get my presentation back up. There we go. So, how do we create this concept of resilience? There are 3 core protective systems that are related to adaptability, or individuals who have a high adaptive personality. Capabilities, attachment and belonging, and community culture and spirituality. When we look at resilience is a sum of all of our experiences. How we balance negative outcomes with positive ones. Attachment and belonging is important. The positive relationships we build with the students in our classroom is the foundation of developing resilience. How students understand their individual capability and their ability to achieve is also important. And community, faith, and culture. Not just what they get from the community, but how they give back. We all play a role in developing resilience by leadership expansion, coming together, how we share what we know with one another, and making real good, data-driven, results-oriented decisions. Again, our ACE score is not the end of our story. It really is an opportunity for us to learn and grow from each other. And building environments that create resilience is important. And that change is ultimately up to us. Like I said before, the ACES presentation is a cliffhanger. So how will you take this information and have an impact in your classroom and in your community? So what we learned today is a little bit about the neuroscience around toxic stress and how it has an impact on risk behaviors associated with ACEs. We know that the ACEs study is the largest of its kind, that ACEs are common, interrelated, and intergenerational. We know resilience is the concept of balancing that fulcrum, balancing negative inputs with positive outcomes, and that we all have to work together to build the next steps to have resilient communities. I just want to thank you for this time. If you have additional questions, please feel free to email me. If you'd like more information about ACEs, I am also available for building presentations. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Hope you all have a good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We'll see ya.